Well, it's working. As I've already mentioned, I am technically challenged, and sometimes when I'm trying to get things to work, it doesn't work. At least in this case, I've got it going. Very, very pleased to say that. Man over machinery. Well, this is Dr. Winkler, and I am discussing ancient civilizations. This is lecture number 17. We were talking last time about the Hellenistic era of Greek history. And I pretty well come to the end of the kind of things I wanted to say. I'm talking about the Alexandrian Museum and Library and Euclid and Archimedes, Eratosthenes. I even talked a little bit about Heron of Alexandria. So one thing I missed, however, I meant to come back to it, didn't quite make it. And that is the question, what happened to the Alexandrian Museum and Library? What happened to the greatest single depository of books in history? Well, at least in the Western tradition. What happened to it? There are several theories. Now, going back to ancient Alexandria, we notice that it is on the coastline. Remember, I showed you on a bigger map of Egypt. It's up there on the coast. Very, very nice. Should be there. It's there for a number of reasons. Well, one of the problems is that the royal palace is here as well. That's not necessarily negative, but notice it's right on the seashore. This can be a problem in more than one way. A lot of the artifacts which we associate, Greek artifacts we associate with the Hellenistic in Alexandria, are now on the bottom of the sea. Because I believe there was an earthquake, anyway, there's a collapse of some of the material into the sea. I mean, I do have this daydream. Historians have weird daydreams. One of which is, for me, that somebody would be walking around Alexandria someplace, see a stone on the ground and kick the stone. Notice there's a hole down underneath the stone. Well, let's go down and take a look. You go down and you find the Alexandrian Museum and Library. Whoa! That's as wonderful as the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was found in the late 1940s. One of the more spectacular discoveries in history as far as our understanding of Judaism and early Christianity. Well, that's not going to happen. I can daydream all I want. That's not going to happen because actually the site of the Alexandrian Library is probably underwater. And papyrus doesn't do very well underwater. So the chance of stumbling across a text here is not very likely. Shall we say, very, very unlikely. Well, another issue on the coastline is if you're meeting enemies, people don't like you. And they come down, they want to invade Egypt, well, they're going to hit this area. It's a very important center, obviously. If you can take the capital right here, well, you've done a pretty good job. During the civil wars in the 1st century BC, Julius Caesar is fighting against his old friend / enemy Pompey. And Pompey tries to establish his position by retreating down to Egypt. You know, Cleopatra's down there and trying to get his strength together to meet Julius Caesar as he takes the Roman navy across the Mediterranean. When Julius Caesar's fleet came into Alexandria, there was a fire that broke out. And the fire, well, some sources say it burned the museum. I think it's more accurate that it burned part of the museum. I should say the library. Burned part of the library. Now, you could say, well, the loss was huge. Well, yes, but most of the library apparently was still intact. And there was time. You see, Rome's not going to weak out for several more centuries yet. There was time and there was effort made to take resources and to recreate or reconstitute the books that were lost. Was it as good after the fire as it was before? Well, probably not, but it might have been close. We say largely the library was intact. Well, then you get some other theories later on. One is that when the Christians took over, and I don't want to disparage the Christians. Sometimes we say that Christians are anti-intellectual. I'm not saying that every Christian's an egghead, but I am going to say that I think that's somewhat exaggerated. However, we do read in early Christianity, and sometimes we call these people saints because they're viewed as a pious person who is looking after the goodness of the religion, goodness of the people. And we do read about these people, sometimes getting the mob together. Pagan learning is down there, all those pagans, and we don't want to have anything with pagan learning. The best thing we can do is destroy the pagans. So let's go down with our pitchforks and our torches and go down and burn the place. Did this happen to the Alexandrian Library? We don't know. Something like that could have happened, clearly. There's another theory that this thing largely remained intact and well into the Byzantine era of this area until we get to Islam. And Islam advances largely in the 700s. We also remember that as the 8th century AD. And they don't like this long Islam learning very much either. And they go down and burn it. Which is our actual best explanation? I'm not sure. And there might be something else. There is a theory. Can you imagine how expensive it would be to simply maintain that thing for centuries, to make sure the items were properly copied and properly stored? And when you start using your money in other directions, it deteriorates. It could be one of these factors. It could be a combination of these factors. But the point I really want to make here is the library does not survive. I remember reading one book saying, well, we have about 500 manuscripts that survive from the ancient world. Well, that's a lot less than hundreds of thousands. Of course, the kind of thing I need to ask the theory, the scholar making the theory, well, is the New Testament one document? Remember, there's, 27 books. There's a number of books in the New Testament. Are you counting them separately? So your numbers can shift somewhat. One of the greatest treasures ever assembled anywhere was lost. Be really, really nice if we had a greater knowledge of it. But that's probably not going to happen unless we have some kind of Dead Sea Scrolls that appear somewhere in Egypt that it's got some books in it. Well, talking about the importance of the Hellenistic. One thing I want to mention is Hellenism and the Jews. Sometimes when we look at this, depending on our cultural and our religious background, we kind of remember there's what we often call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. And it's written until, I think the book of Daniel was the last one that was actually written. And that's like the 3rd century BC, in the 200s BC. So what's happening between that time frame until we get the beginning of the Christian era, which the New Testament likes to talk about? John the Baptist, Jesus of Nazareth, Peter, Paul. Then we have this, shall we say, introduction of Christian doctrine and religion. A question we have to ask ourselves: what is going on? You simply have the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible is not around anymore, and then pretty soon that it literally disappears, and then lo and behold, bingo, around the birth of Jesus, then everything takes off again. It's not quite that simple. Let me talk just a little bit about the history. Now remember, we talked about Alexander's empire breaking up. Breaks up into pieces. One of these is called the Seleucid Empire, which we see represented right here. One thing that's just a little bit misleading about this map is that one of the contested areas are actually between the Ptolemies here in Egypt and the Seleucids up here. And that happens to be the area of Palestine, where large numbers of Jews live. The importance to remember what's happening here is that to understand early Christianity, to understand it, we have to see where it's coming from. And there is an attempt by bad man in history, Antiochus Epiphanes, to destroy completely. Let me run that past you again. To destroy completely the Jews and their religion. Well, no, he doesn't want to kill all the Jews. He's not Adolf Hitler. But in reality, just destroy your religion. Actually destroy them as far as a culture and as far as a mentality is concerned. Why does he want to do this? We can say that's not exactly a very high-minded aspect of his civilization. Of course it's not. But he wants a united empire. You've got these various cultures and religions running around, and there's this external threat. Rome's rough, tough dudes. They got a good navy, got a wonderful army, and they're marching, advancing continually into the eastern Mediterranean. Antiochus Epiphanes realizes at some point that if he doesn't figure out a way of beating them, they're going to take him over. And he's quite right in this. As you know from your knowledge of the Roman Empire, the Roman Empire does occupy all of this area. And there's a contested area down here that Rome does occupy for a period of time. Can we say the heart of the Seleucid Empire and much of the areas over here are actually taken over by Rome? So the fear is not, or the threat I should say, it's not something that's made up. It's a real fear. Is he right in saying that he should have a unified culture to meet him? Well, that is clearly debatable. But let's do this. Let's try to destroy Judaism. These people live down here. Remember, this is a contested area between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And if you have the time frame we're discussing right here, the Seleucids actually control this. There are other times when the Ptolemies have their control going farther up. So can we say it's on the borders? No doubt about that at all. He tries to destroy Judaism. This is a concerted effort to destroy the religion. Had he been successful, it's entirely possible that the entire scope of religion in the modern world will be completely different. If you had to destroy Judaism, it's hard to believe, is it not, that the Jewish faith would exist. But if he had destroyed Judaism in the 2nd century BC, way before Christianity was heard of, then what would be the possibility that anything like Christianity could develop? As you know from your Christian background, those of you who are Christians, that we have a certain number of expectations about a Messiah, an anointed one, coming to save people from a military oppression or from their sins. If that idea had not existed, then how would you explain Christianity? When Jesus comes, he explains his religion referring to Judaism. He quotes the 10 Commandments. He gives statements of faith relating to the nature of the religion, and he gives a statement of faith as the same as the statement of faith in Judaism. That's the Shema. He says, I have not come to do away with the law, in other words, the law of Moses. I've come to fulfill the law. Well, if there was no law of Moses, and all that knowledge had been destroyed, then how do we view him? He couldn't possibly come in to a matrix which we understand and make these kind of contributions. I think the destruction of Judaism would have been changed the modern religions of the world in a manner that we could not even identify them. He tries to destroy Judaism. Well, he does so by coercion, by hurt people. Their story. Now, there are some books. We'll talk about the Apocrypha in just a little while. There are 4 books of Maccabees, but the first 2 are the ones that are the best books. We call them First and Second Maccabees. That's where we read about all this. There was an old man by the name of Eleazar. He's an old man. And the Antiochus's men, remember these are Greeks, these are Hellenistic Greeks. And they come to this Eleazar and say, look, eat some pork. Guy says, I don't eat pork. And the guards say, look, we don't want to hurt you. We don't want to do anything bad to you. You're a nice old guy. Just eat so the kids will see you eat. So they'll know that this old wise man is giving up on the religion. They'll give up on it too. He refuses. He says, all my life, now I'm going to back off from these kids, from my religion. They kill him. I don't know how really we should take this at face value. But I think there's a shorter version of the first book of Maccabees. The second Maccabees is a longer version. It's the same kind of story, where there was a woman, she's a widow. She's got, I believe it was 5 sons. And they're taken in front of Antiochus himself. And he demands that they give up their religion. He starts with the older ones. And he does bad things to them. He cuts off their hands. You know, you're not dead yet, of course. You're bleeding pretty profusely, probably. And then he throws you in a fire or puts you in like a pot to roast you alive. Extremely painful way of dying. They all die till you get to the youngest son. And the Antiochus says, look, I don't want to kill you. You just got to give up your religion. And according to the record, he holds out his hands and saying, Antiochus, you can take my hands from me, but God will give them back. Is he talking about a resurrection? A physical resurrection? Probably. So he denies Antiochus's appeal. And of course, he's killed as well, as is his mother. The point is, maybe these stories aren't quite accurate. Maybe they're an exaggeration. But I don't think there's any real question that the Jews are doing everything they can to survive against severe pressure. There's another family, bunch of brothers. The youngest is Judas Maccabeus. We call these the Maccabees, plural, meaning a number of men from the family. Resistance falls upon the older brothers, finally until you get to Judas. And Judas hides out in the hill country. It's like guerrilla warfare. You sneak down and you attack something and you come back and you hide out so they can't get you. Well, Antiochus sends armies, large armies. And it's like this. You don't have to believe the numbers because I don't either. He sends thousands of men, and Judas Maccabeus meets him with hundreds, and he's victorious. And then Antiochus Epiphanes sends many thousands. And now Judas Maccabeus has a few thousand, and Judas Maccabeus wins. Some of these stories, remember, these are the Hellenistic Jews, Hellenistic Greeks. Remember, Alexander first met elephants when they were fighting over in the Indus Valley. But the Greeks have looked at this saying, that's a pretty nice combat platform. So they bring these combat elephants over. So when the Hellenistic Greeks are attacking the Jews, they bring elephants. If you're on the ground, how do you beat an elephant? One of my favorite stories, one of the Jews gets underneath this elephant, comes up with a sword, I should say spear, and goes right into the animal, probably into the heart or something. The animal dies on the spot, falls down and kills him. In a stunning feat of arms, a stunning example of resistance to tyranny, the Jews are successful in defeating Antiochus Epiphanes, in defeating these Greeks, maintaining or getting their independence, at least for a while, and then maintaining their religion. One of the great accomplishments, literally, in the history of warfare. Well, let's jump ahead to the Christian era. There are people that are looking for a Messiah, an anointed one, to come and save them. There's a religious aspect, but there's also a political aspect. And some people are looking for a Messiah to be a military leader, someone like Judas Maccabeus, to come forward and beat the Romans and kick them out of town. Maybe we should also remember this when we're talking about the Jewish revolt against the Romans, largely from 66 AD to 70 AD. You're going to take on the Roman Empire? I mean, you're going to hold out at Masada for a long time. You're going to take armies in the field, but you're not going to beat Rome. Rome's power is huge. Resources are enormous. Why would they try this? You can say an act of desperation. But looking back a while, well, can we say Judas Maccabeus was running against the same kind of odds and was successful? In Judaism, there is almost every holiday is actually one that's found in the Old Testament, found in the Hebrew Bible. An exception to this, probably the most important exception, is Hanukkah, or Chanukah, however you want to pronounce it. What happened is this. Of course, when the Antiochus's men come in, they take the temple and they defile it. There are purification rites the Jews need to go through before they can repurify this and take all the junk out of there in the defilement. And it takes 7 days. They have a lamp, and they look at the lamp, and the lamp has to keep burning while they have their purification rites. And as they only have enough oil in the lamp to last for like 1 day. And then you look at this, and however, in the miracle, it burns for like 7 days, so they're able to purify the temple. So even in modern Judaism today, Hanukkah is usually in December. You have the Festival of Lights, and it usually runs 7 days. You have the shofar, the helper candle. You actually say, and anyway, you light the candles, and one night you light one, and another light you light 2, and then 3, and then 4, going on up. So it's a minor Jewish holiday, but since it's often found near Christmas, and Christmas is this enormous Christmas holiday with all this kind of money flowing around. Perfect holiday, perfect holiday. You can spend all the money you want guilt-free because the money spending is done by an invisible elf called Santa Claus. Of course, when you max out your cards, then comes January and you have to pay for those. It's a different manner. But shall we say, its association, Hanukkah's association, fairly closely with Christmas means the Jews have actually started paying more attention to it. Well, I already mentioned the first and second books of Maccabees, first and second Maccabees. And we find them in what we call the Apocrypha. This is in the Catholic Church. The Catholic accepts the Apocrypha as inspired within their canon of accepted holy books. They tend to call them the Deuterocanonical, which essentially means secondary canon or added later to canon. I'm kind of a Bible. I like the Bible. I used to read it all the time. And I was actually quite pleased when I discovered the Apocrypha because it's the same kind of things that we're told, but it's not the same things we read in the Bible. I've got a whole new set of books I can read that are quite inspirational. They're historical, sometimes they're philosophical, and sometimes they talk about morals. Why are they secondary books? Well, they're largely, a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of these are written originally in Hebrew. But the Jews now are so closely associated in places like Alexandria, where they go down and become merchants, largely. And the local people, where you really need to know Greek, right? The people living in Palestine, that they tend to circulate these books in Greek, not in Hebrew. In some cases, the Greek versions have survived. In other cases, the original Hebrew version is lost. Now, if you're looking for books you want to accept in Judaism, isn't it a lot stronger? Shall we say, don't you get a lot more authority if you go to books in Hebrew rather than Greek? When these are circulated in Greek, they have a tendency to be viewed, shall we say, with less authenticity. How big of a book are we talking about? Well, 14 to 16 books. Why do I have this one over here? Some religions want to add 1st and 2nd Esdras into the Apocrypha. Other religions say, now let's leave it out. So 14/16 books. They're fun, they're entertaining, there's good history here. Now, the Catholics accept them as canon. You can use the Apocrypha for doctrinal matters. Orthodox, remember those, the Eastern Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox religion? Before we have the Protestant Reformation, there's 2 basic forms of Christianity. In the West, it's Roman Catholicism. In the East, it's Greek Orthodox. How do they accept these things? Catholicism accepts these quite well. The Orthodox accept them as something very good to read and moral, they're inspired, but they don't usually use them for doctrinal issues. Now, then there's the Protestants. As you know, starting in 1517, Martin Luther pins up the 95 Theses. We now have an explosion of new doctrines. And, of course, you and I, most of you, I guess, are Americans. We look around at the number of Christian religions in the United States, go, whoa, very large number. It takes a while, but there's a little explosion of the number of Christian religions. However, they tend to have, even some of the more recent Protestant religions, they tend to go back to some of the basic doctrines of Martin Luther, John Calvin, and others. But the Protestants reject them. If you were to buy a Bible in the United States and other English-speaking countries, even in the 19th century, in the 1800s, very frequently you would buy your Old Testament, your New Testament, and they would have the Apocrypha in there as well. If it's not canon, why are they there? Well, people say they're good to read. They have moral lessons here. They're not like the pseudepigrapha. Let me make a distinction. They're not like the pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha are actually a whole bunch of books. They're actually fun to read too. They're falsely attributed. I mean, you have such things in the pseudepigrapha, which include the story of Adam and Eve. Well, Adam and Eve didn't write anything, at least not that we know of. These things were written many, many years later. Can we say this is like historical fiction? You might get the name right, you might get some issues right, but in reality, this is not exactly what you want to hang your hat on. In other words, falsely attributed. Nobody accepts the pseudepigrapha as doctrinally correct. Let's take a look at this and see if we can get a better idea of the religious and ethical milieu from which Jesus comes. There's a book of ethical teachings. The Catholic Church tend to call it Ecclesiasticus. Not Ecclesiastes, different book, Ecclesiasticus. And more recently, scholars kind of call it Sirach or Sirach, because it was written by Judah ben Sirach, a Jew. It's talking about morality, it's talking about ethics. Until recently, we knew that it was originally written in Hebrew, but the Hebrew text was largely lost. Till recently, our text in Hebrew was really quite small. However, in some excavations done in Israel, I believe this was done at Masada, they actually found, scholars actually found, some more of this in Hebrew. So we have a pretty good percentage. We don't have all of it in the original Hebrew, but we do have a good, probably 2/3 of it now. It's very nice. Well, let's look at it and see if some of this sounds familiar. Let's look at Sirach 15 and 15. Chapter 15, verse 15. If you want to keep the Lord's commands, let me shift it over a little bit. You can decide whether, let's get all the quoting here, whether you, I think I got my font a little bit too big for this, whether you will be loyal to him or not. You want to keep the Lord's commandments? You can do so. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, in the function of Protestantism, the real cardinal doctrine of Protestantism is that you are saved by an act of grace. The Lord, in his infinite wisdom and mercy, chooses you for salvation. You have nothing to say about it. In other words, you can be good, you can be kind, you can be benevolent, help little old ladies across the street, you can pet kitty cats, you can donate to your favorite charity. To you and me, that looks like a good work. And I'm sure the Protestants would agree, but that's nothing to do with your salvation. Your salvation is a gift. You cannot earn it. And even though you seem to be doing good things, unless the Spirit of the Lord is within you, it's not righteous. So in reality, it might look good, but it's not righteous. So you can decide whether to be loyal to him or not. According to Protestant religion, you cannot. Therefore, can we say the Protestants are going to say, nah, we're not buying this. And they don't. Let's look at some of these and see if they look similar to you. Sirach 7:35. Do not hesitate to visit the sick. Good idea. If I got rheumatism, I'm bummed out, I feel lousy. Come by and visit. Hey, make me feel better. Matthew, Jesus talking, of course, 26:36. I was sick and ye visited me. Similar, yeah. Sirach 7:36. Whatever you do, remember that you must die. That's something good to remember. And unfortunately, everybody dies. Do you want to be remembered for being a jerk and a lout and a cheat? Maybe you want to be a better person. Maybe before the Grim Reaper comes to get his harvest, that you want to do something better with your life. So, okay, remember, whatever you do, remember that someday you must die. Once again, Jesus talking in Luke 12:20. Ah, thou fool. Okay. This night thy soul shall be required of thee. You didn't remember that you're going to die. Sirach 9:8. Uh-oh. Gentlemen, please be careful about this one. This is a big, big problem. When you see a good-looking woman, look the other way. Don't look, guys. Don't look. I'm sorry. When you see a good-looking woman, look the other way. Many men have been led. Okay. Have been led astray by a woman's beauty. Don't do it, guys. It'll lead you astray. It kindles passion as if it were fire. Hot lady leads you to hot passions. Matthew 5:28. Whosoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery already with her in his heart. Similar? Sure. Sirach 10:6. Don't be angry. Oh, come on. Lighten up, pal. Don't be angry with someone for every little thing he does wrong. Yeah, I know he parked in your parking stall. Yeah, he's playing music on the bus. Okay, don't be angry with this poor guy. Matthew 5:22. If you are angry with your brother, say Jesus kind of states this a little bit more forcefully. If you are angry with your brother, you will be brought to trial. You're going to be condemned for what you do. Same idea, but can you say more forcefully expressed? Sirach 28:2. If you forgive someone who has wronged you, your sins will be forgiven. Matthew. Get back over here. Matthew 6:14. If you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. Sirach 35:19. he, I guess meaning the Lord, he will give every person what his thoughts and actions deserve. Matthew 15 and 19. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts. These are the things which defile man. When Jesus comes with his doctrine, and I'm not saying his doctrine is the same, but if we understand where he's coming from, it makes a little more sense. So he's taking these basic ideas and he's expanding on them. But he doesn't create so many of these ideas. He's taking what's gone on before and he expands them and clarifies them. So in understanding Judaism before Jesus' time helps us understand Jesus during his time. Can we say some of this has Greek influence? The Wisdom of Solomon just, I'm not saying it's a bad read, I'm saying it's a repetitive read. He talks about wisdom, which people like Socrates and Plato say, well, you need wisdom. Sure, you need wisdom. You need to function well. You need to make good decisions. You need to understand the world better. The Wisdom of Solomon, remember, it's not Solomon. Solomon was dead a long time ago. It's not pseudepigrapha. They're not really saying that wisdom. Solomon said this. But this is the kind of wisdom that Solomon would give if he was still alive. Wisdom is everything. Wisdom makes people moral. Wisdom makes the sun rise. Wisdom, wisdom, wisdom. It sounds Greek to me. Excuse me, I said that wrong. Yeah, I did say it right. It sounds like Greek philosophy to me. And I just pulled out one of these things for your consideration. Wisdom begins when you, let's go back, when you sincerely want to learn. To desire wisdom is to love her. Would Socrates agree with this? Probably. Know thyself. Search yourself. Now, let's say one other thing about the Jews during the time frame of the Hellenistic, and then we'll go on and discuss Rome. The Septuagint is a Greek translation, very, very old, like 2nd century BC. In other words, the 100s BC. And it is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Septuagint, sometimes we call this the translation of the 70, because apparently, at least by tradition, 70 scholars were involved in this translation. Everybody working together, it didn't take too long. Why would the Jews bother to make a translation into Greek? Well, because people aren't reading Hebrew so much anymore. We really do need a Greek translation. So we have two basic ancient texts of the Hebrew Bible. One's in Hebrew, one's in Greek. Of course, you're thinking, what's very logical to think this? Well, it's the same thing, right? Of course, you want to read the original Hebrew. The text that we have in the Hebrew Bible is called the Masoretic text. It survives in one copy. The tradition says this, that during the siege of Jerusalem, in the Jewish revolt, remember, from 66 AD to 70 AD, the Romans are going to destroy everything they can. The Hebrew Bible, the Masoretic text, was smuggled in a coffin of a dead man outside the building, so apparently the Romans didn't look. And if they had seen the text in there, they would have destroyed it. So in one copy, it does survive. Say, well, that's superior. Well, not quite. What we have in ancient writings, we have what we call textual traditions. We're so used to the printing press. You put information in the printing press and you really roll this off, and you have, hundreds, thousands of copies of the same text. So when you write your Bible, when you write your books, when you write your articles, you polish it exactly the way you want it. You send it to your publisher, and these are available all over. But in the ancient world, when the only way you can make a copy of the book is to copy it by hand, you have this over here and this over here. So you look at this and you go, okay, and copy it. You can imagine how tedious that work would be. There are times, it happens almost inevitably, there are small mistakes made. Sometimes you take a word in the nominative and it ends up over here in the subjunctive. That kind of thing does happen. Does it mean the same thing? Rather than I am, I would be. Similar, but they're not the same thing. And sometimes there's things that are confusing in the Hebrew Bible, like the words have been shifted around a little bit. Sometimes it looks like maybe there's a few words missing here and there. If you have a book right here, and as you're writing down, it has these kinds of statements in it, and maybe even these kinds of errors. You have this book, and it's copied by these people with the same issues. Lost words, mistaken words, confusing words, whatever. Now you know it's in that textual tradition. If you have another textual tradition where there are differences between them, we have two textual traditions. Which is the most authentic? Well, it's very, very helpful if you took the one and compared it with the other, and you use methods and simply try to figure out which one is the most authentic. And then you come up with, shall we say, the best interpretation of what you're reading. Even though the Septuagint is in Greek, it has different issues in it than the Hebrew Bible. Therefore, it's from a different textual tradition. We don't have the Hebrew from which it was translated, but having the Greek is very helpful. Because now, if we have something confusing over here, we can look over here and make a comparison and go, this helps us understand this. So having a Greek translation is extremely important for our understanding of the Bible. And if you're a biblical scholar, you're going to have to know Hebrew. And you're going to have to know Greek. Because you have to know one to understand, to help understand the other. Well, the Jews have their impact. And if you like the Bible, it has a big impact even today. Let's go on and continue discussing history. Let's shift from the Greeks. Let's go over to the Romans. In a similar manner, remember in Greece, we have the Hellenic Greek and the Hellenistic Greek-like. We have two basic time frames. So we divide this up relatively nicely. In Roman history, we have also two time frames. The Republic to about 31 BC. And the Empire from 31 BC. Now notice that I don't have a beginning date here, and I don't have an ending date over here either. Well, why? We don't know exactly what date do you want to give the beginning of Rome. Let's go to Rome. We usually say the beginnings of Rome are probably about the 8th century BC, the 700s BC. That's a long time ago. Okay. How about 7 Hills of Rome? Seven Hills of Ancient Rome. Okay. I've been to Rome once, decades ago. Fascinating. I urge you all to go, if you get the opportunity. We usually talk about the Hills of Rome. What we're actually talking about are the higher prominences on the floodplain of the Tiber River, which comes down here. Why don't we find the early settlements near the river itself? For the simple reason that if you're down in the floodplain and it floods, well, you got water up to your eyeballs, you got a problem. So why do you live on the hills? Well, you're above the floodplain. It can be a pretty bad year. And a lot of rain. And if all this area floods and you're up on one of the hills, you can look down and say, my darn, glad I'm not down there treading water. So we do have a tendency to see the early settlements around Rome on the hills. Later on, of course, when the Roman Empire is here, we talk about the hills of Rome being places of a lot of important buildings and public monuments. But that's down the road from the time frame we're discussing. Archaeologists, in doing excavations in these areas, actually do support the idea that in the 8th century BC, roughly in the 8th century BC, there were a habitation here. Now these are mud huts. I mean, they're going, okay, these aren't exactly great marble statues or anything like that. But there were people living here. And can we say, technically speaking, they were fairly simple, but they were here. Is that the beginning of Rome? We can't say. The traditional date, I'm trying to remember, is it 756? Something like that BC, the traditional date for the founding of Rome. It's as good as any. On the other hand, it's probably no better than others as well. Rome goes through, you can imagine, over a period of 7 centuries. There's going to be considerable advancements. There are going to be considerable changes in the political structure of the Romans and also social structure. And we tend to call this earlier time frame the Republic. The Republic is ruled by a group of old men. We call them the Senate, the senators. Now, we would like to say this is representative government. Well, it is, but the only people from upper class areas can serve in the Senate. This is not something like we see in ancient Athens with their democracy, where about all you have to be is old and you can serve. So a lot of people can vote. Once again, women, slaves, foreigners are excluded. But you can't vote for the good guy who bakes bread down here. You have to vote for the senators. The Republic has trouble. I'll address this again later. They have a lot of trouble when it actually comes to controlling the allegiance of the generals. So I've already mentioned the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. There's numerous other occasions of this. There's an era of political instability because of that. And we're fighting for, different civil wars for over 100 years. Now, after Caesar's assassination, as you all know, in 44 BC, then his heirs, including Octavian and Mark Antony, slug it out. Octavian, later known as Caesar Augustus, becomes victorious. And Mark Antony and his girlfriend Cleopatra don't survive. But can we say, after this era of civil wars, the Octavian or Augustus is the last man standing. So he's able to reinstitute peace. This is after the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Now, the Senate continues to exist. Large is the debating society. Augustus doesn't say, well, you guys all got to go home. Can we have the trappings of a representative government? Can we have the trappings that the government is following the will of the people? We can possibly do that. But he's really ruling by himself. He allows them to exist. Large is a debating society. He doesn't give them the ability to tax. He doesn't give them authority to rule. Anyway, that's kind of the first time frame. But from 31 BC, when Caesar Augustus is now in control, though the Senate exists, quite frankly, they have no power. The emperor, the one-man rule. Later, we get in the civil wars, we're going to talk about several emperors fighting each other at the same time. That's down the road a ways. So we get the empire, another form of government. We usually say some of the greatest accomplishments in Roman civilization takes place not during the Republic, but during the empire. But now, despite we have, unfortunately, other problems, external invasions, civil wars that do destabilize the empire, in reality, we're talking about largely one-man rule. Since I do not take this to the, and when did Rome end? There's a traditional date, 476 AD, when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, who's young, I think he's even still in his teens, he'd had nominal authority, no real authority at all, but he's still a Roman. And in 476 BC, they say, get out of town, kid, because the real power, the Germanic tribes have now come in, and now they're in control of the state. Is that our best date for the fall of Rome? Well, we'll talk about this later. 410 AD is a pretty good date too. 455 AD is a pretty good date as well. We can even throw 406 if we like. Can I say the traditional date is not necessarily the best? Quite frankly, I think there's other dates that are better. However, sometime in the 400s, sometimes in the 5th century AD, Rome goes out, in a political sense, goes out of existence. This is the western half. The eastern half, which we call the Byzantine Empire, is going to last for another 1,000 years. So we're talking about Rome in general, but the fall of Rome we usually talk about the western half, which goes out of existence in a political sense sometime in the 5th century AD. So we talk about the 8th century BC, 5th century AD. That's a long time. That's well over 1,000 years. So the history of Rome is very, very large. What's it like? Well, root huts. Now, before I get into all that, we do have to have a discussion. Why Rome's important? Why is it there in the first place? It's not uncommon for cities to exist as economic reasons. For economic reasons, I said that improperly. This could be trade routes. Remember Alexandria in Egypt? It's right near the mouth of the Nile River. It's on the Mediterranean. Trade involved. It's a good place to put a city. Sometimes we see cities that have military importance. This was an outpost originally, but then people came later on to trade with the soldiers. And later on, they established businesses, and later on, you get a city. We say most often it's transportation and economic reasons. Let's take a look at this. This is the city of Rome. Can I get Italy up here? Oh, how about a map? We got the empire now. All right. How about ancient Rome city? Okay, it's essentially the kind of thing we have here, only a little bit more elaborate. Let's try yet another map. I'll get one yet that works. Let's try ancient Italy in this case. Which one works the best? How about a good old topographical map here? This is good enough for our purposes. We're in the Italian peninsula. A lot of people live here. Why is that? Because of the agricultural techniques. The soil is not heavy. It's not terribly deep. It's relatively easy to plow. And if you happen to live near Naples, down here near Vesuvius, you actually have a situation where the soil is good soil. It's good, healthy soil. We can actually plow it fairly easily. So there's economic reasons why people are here. One of the early successes in Rome is to have a larger population than its adversaries. More people, more guys with spears, bigger armies, you tend to have more success. Well, there's going to be trade going back and forth in the north. Now, people don't usually trade on the eastern side of the Italian peninsula. One of the reasons for that is there's less water. You don't have as much streams coming down. The Apennine Mountains, which run down the center of this, are closer to the sea over here. So there's less economic viability over here. There's fewer farms. On this side of the Apennines, over in this direction, you do have a larger plain, more people, more rivers, more commerce. And if you're going back and forth, let's say you're living down here, or you're trading with these people up here, or the reverse is true. You're going back and forth. You're going to go back along this side primarily. And right in the middle happens to be the Tiber River. You don't really go around the Tiber up here because you got to through the hills and it's dangerous and the roads aren't good. It's a better idea to be down here. But you need a place to cross the river. Let's go back to the Seven Hills of Rome. The Tiber River, you can see it right here, has a island in the middle of it. You could build a bridge along here, anywhere along here, but the expanse of the river is larger there because it's larger, it's more costly, more time consuming to build the bridge. It is easier. Can I get a better map here? Well, probably not. Take a shot at this one. What you're not seeing here very easily is that there is a bridge which crosses, maybe I got to back this other one as well, that crosses from here to here. Shorter bridge, easier to build, easier to maintain. But then there's another bridge that's going to go across from here to here. This is easier than crossing the river at any other place. Because you've got the island, therefore you have a bridge, you have a lot more people coming from all over Italy, north and south. They come here, they kind of focus. This is the easiest place to cross the river. You can take your cart, take your donkey, and you cross here. Now, sometimes you have to pay a toll in order to use these facilities. But when you have people coming and funneling into an area, this is a great place. Well, it's a great place to put a restaurant, isn't it? Sure. It's a great place to put a restaurant. It's a great place for a wheelwright to live. He's going to fix your wagon. It's a great place to have anything dealing with people staying over. Yeah, you might have a brothel or two. You might have a drinking establishment. You just don't go have dinner. You go in and take some wine and get looped. Those kind of things. So this becomes an economic focus. And when it does so, you have more economic reasons for people to be there. And can we say success does build upon itself? Because as you get more restaurants, you need more restaurants. You get more people fixing your wagons, you need more people to fix wagons. So it grows largely around this island. Now, if we look at the topography of ancient Italy, and you wanted to put a city someplace that was largely in a place to control, first of all militarily and later on, well, economically, militarily, and also administratively, like in a government. Perhaps the best place on the entire peninsula would be right there. And it's helpful that you have this as a transportation area. So Rome is an important location, as you know, for a number of reasons. As Rome begins to expand, and expand quite considerably in all of these areas, it in reality becomes a good place not only to control Italy, but to control the Mediterranean. Don't need city, this time I want the empire. Sure, let's see if that works. Let's see if I can give you a nice, good map of the Roman Empire. That doesn't work too badly. Notice that, of course, initially, the Roman success is largely within the realm of the Mediterranean. Later on, there's more success going up into Central and Western Europe. But let's look at a good location, to have a central location to administer, conquer, and later administer these areas. Can we say the exact middle of the Mediterranean is right here? Give or take, it's about right there. Not too much right here, shall we say. But look, it's not in the center, but it's close. Just a little bit off center, we find the city of Rome. And since it's a little bit off center, it's close enough to the middle that roads, of course, going through here, and Romans are extremely famous for their roads. We're also going to see, Rome is not technically on the sea, but you can take the Tiber is a navigable river. Let's get it back to it. The Tiber is a navigable river. and the port is called Ostia. And Ostia is a few miles down on the sea. So you can have trade going up the river. And as looking at as Rome as a naval power, this is a pretty good place for location as that as well. So can we say that geography, in many respects, favors the location of Rome? Rome's kind of fun in a lot of ways. There was a Roman historian by the name of Livy. Now, Livy was living in the 1st century BC, about the time of Julius Caesar. When we get to the time frame that's closer to the time frame when he was living, we have a tendency to, shall we say, think he's more accurate. But he just loves good stories. Oh, just loves good stories. So we don't have to take these necessarily as at face value, but his stories are so good they're worth telling. The founders of Rome, by tradition, were two brothers by the name of Romulus and Remus. They were raised by a she-wolf. Now, I don't think this really happens. How about I spell it properly? And he tells us that they were raised by a she-wolf. These boys are starving, and the she-wolf suckles them. I don't think this happens, but it's too good of a story. Well, the men grow up, and they have a falling out with each other. So Romulus sounds more like Rome. We do say the name of Rome comes from Romulus. He and Remus have it out. I believe Romulus actually kills Remus. Interesting stories. Well, as Rome develops into a city, there are, and I'll talk about the Etruscans more in just a little bit. Probably can't see this, but near Rome there is an Etruscan city called Veii. And the Romans are expanding, and they run across a few problems. They don't get along too well with their neighbors. The Etruscans control them, as I'll point out in a little while. The Etruscans control them. And then, however, they try to break away. And however, they fight a battle with the Veians. And the Veians are victorious. The Veians have the opportunity now. They have beaten the Romans to now go in, attack and take the city and destroy Rome. How can the Romans, whose army is really not doing very well, how can the Romans possibly defeat them? Well, if you can cut down the bridge, if you can tear the bridge apart, before the Veians can get across it with their army, what you have to have is time to destroy it. You need a contingent. You need some men on the wrong side of the river, on the Veian side of the river. Because if you destroy the bridge, the Veians can't come across any other place. There are 3 men, the most prevalent of which is Horatius at the bridge. 3 men against the Veian army. The Veians come, and Horatius fights the other. They're bloody, they're pounded around, but they're still somehow they can continue this fight. Now the bridge has been destroyed behind them. They were successful, but they're still on the wrong side of the bridge. So you're going to have to get across. His 2 companions jump in. The armor is going to take you straight to the bottom. Can you really walk across the bottom with all the mud and the gunk down there? Probably not. You're going to drown. But according to the story, they made it across. Now there's only Horatius by himself against the Veian army. He's got to survive. So with all his armor on, he jumps into the river. Now he bobs up, jumps up, takes a breath of air, keeps going down, and he makes his way across. Really? I don't believe it either. That's real. I'm sorry. I'm a pretty gullible man, believe me. I believe all kinds of odd things. But in reality, I have a hard time believing that one. It's a good story, right? These are the kinds of things we tend to associate with the, well, the early history of Rome. Modern historians are saying, yeah, sure. One of my other favorite stories coming from Livy is Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus is a farmer, and he lives outside of Rome. He has a farm, and he's there. Of course, remember they have trouble with the Etruscans, the Boians, other peoples, and they need everybody to fight. So they come, representatives of the Senate come to him and saying, we need you to fight. And he says, well, of course I will fight. Why would I not? No, we're making you the leader in this emergency, Cincinnatus. We're making you dictator. However, when it's over, and let's hope we're victorious, we want you to give the power back which we've given to you. And he said things like, why would I take the power and keep it? When I have my farm, I have my land. According to the story, he does lead the Romans into battle. They are victorious. When it's over, he does not keep the reins of government. He does not become a permanent dictator. He hands back power to the Senate, and he goes back to his farm. Does this happen very often in history? We have someone who ever does have power to ever give it up. Can we say it's very, very rare? In American history, we have an example. It's called George Washington. Could Washington have made himself a king or dictator of America had he decided to do so? Very likely. As long as he had support of the army, he can control America, can control the United States. But he handed it back. King George of England, King George III, when he heard of this, he said, if Washington hands back the power, he'll be the greatest man who ever lived, because everybody keeps power. Washington didn't want to lead the army. He didn't want to be president. He gave it all back. Sometimes even today we call Washington the modern Cincinnatus, because in his case, he did have power and he did give it back. So we're using a Roman expression on a modern action, at least in this case, a modern action of George Washington. Well, the Etruscans really controlled the city. In fact, we can argue perhaps that the city originally was an Etruscan town. However, archaeologists have looked at this and said, we're talking about a pretty diverse culture in Rome. We're probably talking about Latin-speaking peoples, and we're talking about Etruscans and other foreigners, people that go back and forth. Now, years ago, we had an exhibit. Remember, in an earlier lecture, I talked about the Chinese exhibit down at BYU Art Museum. Stunning, wonderful experience. They also had an Etruscan exhibit, which was also quite stunning, and I'm really glad I got to see it. Like the Chinese exhibit, I went more than once. Well, at that time, you were driving down I-15 from Salt Lake Valley. You go over the point of the mountain, and along the side of the road, they had a number of billboards. You see them all the time. They advertise motels or whatever. You see billboards on the side of the road. And we're driving down. I remember seeing this. It was there for a long time, because the Etruscan exhibit was around for a long time, for months. When I remember driving down, you see one of these billboards off the side that said, Rome wasn't built in a day. Very, very famous comment. We heard a lot. Yeah, Rome was not built in a day. And then in the next billboard, it says, Rome wasn't built by the by the Romans. The next billboard, it said, Rome was built by the Etruscans. Next billboard says, come to BYU and see the Etruscan exhibit. I thought that was very clever, kind of a progression of ideas. But are they correct? Was Rome built by Romans, or was it built, shall we say, in a physical nature? Was it built by the Etruscans? When the Etruscans first start controlling Rome, about 753 BC, They find it an area of mud huts. The Etruscans, however, are city builders, and they find it as a town, a city of mud huts, thatched roofs, walls made out of wood, and they rebuild at least the center monuments downtown in stone. They find it in sticks and mud, and they leave it in stone. So the billboards are really quite correct. Well, who are the Etruscans and where do they live? Oh, let's get a map for you. Oh, it's a good map. Good map. Good map. Does that work? Once again, we're looking at the Italian peninsula. Remember who lives down here? The Greeks live down here. The Etruscans largely live up here. Nowadays, this area is called Tuscany. In the ancient world, it was called Etruria, which goes back to the Etruscans. Who are these people? Let's look at Etruscan writing. I kind of gave you a history of the alphabet, didn't I? Start out with slaves maybe outside of Egypt. We get the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians write in an alphabet. The Greeks write in an alphabet, which they borrow from the Etruscans. And now, we borrow from the Phoenicians. So the Greeks get the alphabet from Phoenicians. And the Etruscans get the alphabet from the Greeks. Does this look... You see, as we look at this, this is not a Latin alphabet. Can you see the similarities? Can we read their language? It's remarkable. There are cemeteries in northern Italy by what we would call Tuscany that go back to the Etruscans. And also we have Latin people, the Romans living sometimes in the same town, sometimes exactly the same time. When you bury people, you have a tendency to put here lies somebody, in both Etruscan and in Latin. So you say this guy's name is Fred or this woman's name is Mary. And you look how that is expressed in Latin. And you look over and see the corresponding letters in Etruscan. You can say, oh, this sound is probably the same or very similar sound. The M goes to M or the B goes to B or whatever you're looking at this time. So we have a pretty good idea as to the sound system. We know words. In Latin, here lies Bill, here lies Mary. And in Etruscan, well, you can kind of make that out. But can we read Etruscan? The simple answer is no. When the Etruscan exhibit came to BYU all these years ago, they did point this out, that we can read about 300 words. Now, if you're learning a foreign language, French, Spanish, German, whatever you happen to be learning, a 300-word vocabulary is actually a pretty good start, particularly if they're the most commonly used words. And a lot of times you can build on that in your additional courses and your personal study to get a pretty good idea as to what to build on the language. However, they've been unable to do this with Etruscan. I talked about this in a couple of contexts already. Let me talk about it again. You do have a situation where you can try to figure out the kinds of things it's talking about by a comparison with the linguistic structures of other languages. If you can place it being related to other languages, that can help you in the decipherment. Once again, every known language and linguistic group has been tried, and they have all failed. Another mystery language, another mystery people. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they came from. Now, there's an ancient Roman writer I mentioned him as making a comparison between the greatest Greek writer, probably Homer, and the greatest Roman writer, who is Virgil. Virgil writes a book called the Aeneid. Yeah, I spent years trying to get into Latin. I've never read the entire book in Latin, but I managed to get through the first book. However, Virgil talks about in the Aeneid that these people came from Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. What he said was this: when the Trojans were defeated in the Trojan Wars, what's that, in 1100 BC, were defeated, and the Greeks simply say, you know, we don't want you around anymore. These people got on their ships, went across the Mediterranean, and they settled in Tuscany, in Etruria. Well, Virgil probably knew quite a bit about the Etruscans. He probably even lived in the area. Is this accurate historical information, or is this kind of folklore? We cannot be sure. But even at that, they are still a mystery people. Am I out of time already? Oh my goodness, please excuse me. I've gone over. It gets so good I just can't shut up. I'll come back to this next time. In the meantime, whatever you're doing, please enjoy, and I'll talk to you again quite soon.